What's up, Harrison?
Luke.
Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Awesome. So we'll give people like another 30 seconds or so to get going. We'll wait till actually 2 o'clock. How's your day going so far, man?
Not bad. How about yours?
Pretty good. Excited to be doing this. Excited to have you here. Thank you again for showing up for this.
Oh, of course. It's going to be a lot of fun. Should be interesting to see what people are curious about and what they want to hear about. And I'm willing to talk about anything. So anything's on the table.
I'm excited.
Yeah.
That being said, those of you who are already on here, if you have any questions, I'm monitoring the chat right now too. Feel free to go ahead and start dropping any you may have. We'll probably cover them, but if you have any that we don't, feel free to throw those out.
I know applications are probably starting to heat up too, so there might be quite a few questions about that.
100%.
Happy to talk about
apps and MCAT. MCAT's about to take off too.
There you go. Yep.
All right. Well, it is 4 Eastern, so we can go ahead and get started. If you just want to introduce yourself, Harrison, go ahead real quick.
Yeah. So hi to those of you that don't know me. My name's Harrison. I'm a first-year med student at Cornell. Have worked with med school coach now for a couple of years. I did my undergrad at Yale, have a degree, I guess, in political science. Thankfully, I'm hanging on to that degree. And then after college, I spent a couple of years playing minor league baseball with the Marlins. Did a post-bac program at Georgetown, applied to med school the first time and didn't get in. So, if any of you guys are in the same boat, I would love to hear questions about that. And then applied the second time around, and thankfully got into Cornell, which was one of my top 5 schools on the list. So I was pretty ecstatic about that. But yeah, that's kind of a little bit about me and my path so far.
Very cool. For those of y'all who don't know me, my name is Luke Schwartz. I am on the MCAT Prep app TikTok page. I don't have an Instagram page yet. But I'm an undergraduate student at Texas A&M University. And I actually applied last cycle and got into some of my top med schools. I haven't decided on which one I'm going to yet. I have till February 17th to rank them all. But I was also a non-traditional applicant, so I did a few years in the military. Still finishing up my first contract there. So if you guys have any questions about non-traditional applications, like random clinical experience type stuff, I'm more than happy to talk about that as well. But to get started, Harrison, if you want to talk about kind of what your transition was like going from undergrad into medical school. A lot of people say they really struggle with that first year, that first semester.
Yeah. So I think I was fortunate in undergrad because I was playing a sport. I had to be really good at time management. And so I learned that early. So I think, for me, that transition happened kind of as I was in college, my first year of college. Obviously, everyone goes through a transition there as well, just transitioning from high school, being out of home for the first time. There's obviously a little bit of transition there, but I think just in terms of like time management and knowing what things had to stay on the table, what things had to, fall off the table for me to commit to certain things and just be, I think for people that don't play sports, or for people that are worried about the transition going from, an undergrad workload to a med school workload, I'm not going to lie about it. Med school is way more work than undergrad. My first semester of med school, which was, this past fall and winter, I think I studied probably on average like 4 hours a day. And that's more than I studied in undergrad. I probably studied like 2 hours a day in undergrad max. And I think you just have to stay a lot more consistent in med school, because if you fall behind, you get absolutely punished. And that's not to like scare people. That's just to tell you that like you have to kind of, plan for being busy quite a bit. And plan for, staying on top of your work. And I've sort of carried that philosophy and that work ethic into this semester. And I'm even busier this semester than I was last semester. But because I had developed those skills, in the first semester, and because I had some things that I knew worked for me, it has been working so far. Granted, it's only been, 2 weeks, but You know, it's about that time management, and it's about setting that schedule for yourself that you know you can stick to, you can be consistent with, and that breeds success for you personally. And that's going to be different for every person.
Yeah, no, that's a terrifyingly exciting to hear, I guess, as I
Yeah.
start next year. Because I know
Yeah.
I'm going to flip my schedule so much, just because like my study habits aren't the best right now. So that's one thing I'm definitely going to have to work on. We do have
Yep.
someone asking, when you said you studied 4 hours a day, what time did you study?
I like to
I'm assuming they meant like
study.
what time of day.
Yeah, I like to study in the evenings, especially in the first semester. We had class, you know, it was a pretty inconsistent schedule. I would say in general, we had class until about 2 p.m. Some days were earlier, some were later, but we also had anatomy lab Monday, Wednesday, until 5 p.m. So on Mondays and Wednesdays, I would come home and pretty much eat dinner, maybe take like a 30-minute break to just, you know, turn off my brain and let myself recharge, um, and then study until I went to bed. Essentially, I try to go to bed at like 11 each night, get that sleep, but it doesn't always work out that way. But yeah, I tend to like studying in the evening. I know a lot of my classmates will study like right when they get out of class. This semester, we're getting out at like 1 in the afternoon. They'll study from 1 to 5 or 6, and then they have the whole night to just kind of relax and, you know, go to the gym or rest or whatever. And again, it's like kind of to each their own. So I just would probably recommend like find out what works for you, find out the times of day that you're most productive, and just kind of stick with those time frames.
Very nice. Yeah, no, that was one of the things I noticed, especially going throughout like the interview process this year, is that a lot of schools are kind of switching to either like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or like first half of the day blocks where you have to be like in curriculum. That way you have that time to study throughout the rest of the day.
Exactly.
So I know a lot of the guys that I've talked to over the past year have said that, you know, they'll spend, you know, they'll block out like 8 to 5, like it's a full-time job. And then after that, that's when they give themselves their
Yep.
time. We have another question asking, do you guys work while in med school? If so, how do you balance it with schoolwork?
Um, I do work a little bit. I do some tutoring for MCAT, and then I obviously work on the, you know, social media team for Med School Coach. So the way that I balance it is, number one, really, really trying hard not to overload myself. I'm so bad at saying no to people. Like, I'm a people pleaser to a T. And so when people are like, oh, I need like an hour of tutoring, I'm like, oh yeah, okay. And then I look at my schedule and I'm like, ooh, I can't do it. And that's hard for me. But I think you have to be realistic with yourself and just, you know, again, have that time frame in your head about like what you can devote to other things and what you can't. Um, and so I think, you know, just being organized and staying on top of that, you should be able to work a few hours a week in med school if you want to. A lot of my classmates don't at all. A lot of my classmates work a lot more than I do. So again, it's a very, it's definitely on a spectrum. Some people do a lot, some people do a little, some people do none. But yeah, what are you going through right now, Luke? Are you working besides?
Yeah, so obviously, as I'm wrapping up my undergrad and about to start the fast journey that is med school, I obviously do this as well. And then I'm still technically on contract with the military until May. And so right now I'm just a reservist. So I do like my 1 weekend a month with them. But whenever coronavirus hit, that drew me out of school like completely, because I'm a medic in the military. And so I had to go out and do like mobile testing clinics, mobile vaccine lines, all that stuff. And that really taught me a ton about balancing that dynamic there, because obviously I couldn't just give up and like not do school for a few semesters. That would have set me behind years. And so for me, what ended up working the best for me was being able to like actually like, I've never been one to use like a planner or like a calendar and stuff.
Mhm.
And that's just because in my mind, like it didn't make sense. I'm very ADHD all over the place. There's no way I was gonna be able to do that.
Yeah.
And that actually forced me to do that. And then I realized how helpful actually like having a schedule, blocking stuff out, like visualizing where in the day you have time to make time for MCAT studying or make time for school studying. And like actually having that visual is huge for me.
Yeah.
We have another question asking, how important is a committee letter for med school for med schools like Columbia, Cornell, etc., or is individual letters okay? So many
Yeah.
people talk about committee letters.
I saw this one pop up, and it's interesting that this came up. I didn't have a committee letter when I applied. So, take that information with a grain of salt. I didn't get in my first time. I don't think it was because I didn't have a committee letter. But I didn't have a committee letter because I wasn't pre-med at Yale, so they wouldn't write, a pre-med committee letter for me because I wasn't a pre-med. And then for my post-bac program, I didn't take enough credits at Georgetown to qualify for a committee letter. So I just applied with a bunch of individual letters. I'm not obviously an admissions officer. I'm not in admissions at all, but I don't think, based on my personal experience going through the process, I don't think not having a committee letter is going to be detrimental. I think having 4, 5, 6 really detailed and well-written and well thought out letters of recommendation from, people that know you well, I think that's the important part. I don't think they're going to really care if it's from a committee or from an individual.
No, I would 100% agree with that. Going through the process this past cycle, not once did I had a committee letter because I was a pre-med major. My major was nutrition going throughout undergrad. Mm-hmm. And not once did they ever bring up anything about the committee letter. I mean, I think it looks nice. If you can get it, definitely have it. Yeah. Don't ever short yourself on easy things to pad your application. Yep. But overall, like Harrison was saying, I think having strong letters of recommendation from professors and, professors that actually knew you, that you actually spent time with, whether you did research in their lab or spent time in their office hours, any professor that actually knew you on more of a personal basis and can write more than just that generic, oh, this guy's good, he should, or this girl's good, she could get into med school. I think that was crucial. I know one of my interviewers specifically mentioned one of my letters, and it was not the committee letter. So I don't think, in my opinion, the committee letter is nice to have. It's a great bonus. But I would focus more on getting to know a prof and getting a nice personal letter of recommendation from someone that actually knows you.
100%. I agree.
We got another question saying, if they do not work during med school, how do they support themselves? And I'll talk about this a little bit just from some of my friends who are currently in med school. A lot of them are taking out loans. Unfortunately, as rough as that is one of the viable ways to get through it. Yep. Obviously, it's no secret that med school accumulates quite a bit of debt. But like Harrison said, if you manage your time efficiently, you should be able to get a couple hours in here and there. But as far as my friends go and what I've seen, lots of them are doing it off of student loans and stuff. And it's unfortunate, but it does get you by. Yep.
I'm seeing the same thing. The people in my class that are not working, they're supporting themselves with student loans. And like you said, it's unfortunate because med school does create quite a bit of debt. I know that, there are lots of schools throughout the country that are trying to get away from that. NYU being one of them. Cornell tries to give, really good financial aid, and they do to a lot of people. So I know that schools are trying to get away from that, which is really, going to be helpful over the coming years. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's loans if you're not working.
There is also kind of shameless plug here, recruiting plug. If the military route interests you, there are a lot of really cool programs that the military does offer that pay you stipends while you're in medical school. So one of them is the HPSP. It's a Health Profession Scholarship Program. And basically what it is whenever you get into medical school, you sign up with them. You have to actually, it's a scholarship, so you have to apply for it. You have to be accepted for it. But basically what it is while you're in medical school, your job is to be a student. Outside of a week in the summer here and there, they will never pull you outside of class. You don't have any military duties besides a week here and there in the summer when you're not in class, but your job is to be a student. When you finish that, then you owe them back however many years of service after you, for however many years of scholarship you took. But that whole time they're paying you living stipends. So you're getting a salary plus a book stipend plus some other stuff. So there's options like that out there. Obviously the military is not for everyone. But there is stuff like that out there.
Luke, I have a question about that. Do they do that for residency as well? If you do, say, 4 years of med school and 4 years of residency, do you then and this might not be the right terminology, so forgive me, do you then owe 8 years back, or is it just 4?
So the way it works, to the best of my knowledge, and again, I could be wrong on this, but I'm pretty certain I have this right. Whenever you start residency, you get the option to either do a military residency or a civilian residency.
Got it.
And so if you do a military residency, it's basically the same thing. You're just at a military hospital. And lots of our hospitals actually treat everyone. So like a lot of my training was down at Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas. It's this massive burn center, this massive level 1 trauma center. And so we take both military and civilian patients from all over the world. But if you choose to do a civilian residency, I believe you're still collecting your regular paycheck. So they'll pay you as like a second lieutenant or a captain, whatever rank you come in with, which you do get like some additional rank for coming in as a doctor. But you get that. However, the key catch there is that your time in residency doesn't count towards your time paying back your years of service. So say you take out 4 years of scholarship while you're in school, and then you have a 4-year residency. That residency doesn't then negate the rest of your contract. Your 4 years you owe them starts once you complete residency.
Got it. It's good to know.
Yeah. We have another question saying, which university is the best for medicine? Kind of a broad question there, but I'll let you tackle it, and then I'll chime in my opinion.
Sure. From being in the shoes of someone who thought about these types of questions, I know that this isn't going to be a satisfying answer. So I'm sorry in advance. It really depends on what you're looking for. There are a lot of schools, the big name schools, the Ivy League schools, the Stanfords, the UCLAs, the kind of like considered the top schools in the country, are mostly research focused. They're research universities, and research is a huge part of the education and the requirements in med school. Being at Cornell, research is a huge part of both our education, and we have a research requirement that we have to fulfill while we're here. I don't know how it is at non-research universities. It could be the same. I don't know. But I think it really depends on what you're looking for. At the end of the day, it's like the best education that you think you can get, and you get all this information from, interviews and asking questions in interviews and things like that. The best education that you think you can get from whatever school it is, that's where you should end up going. If, fingers crossed for all of you guys, if you have choices on where to go to med school, that's what you should be focused on. And so I don't necessarily know that there's like the best school in the country. I'll sort of like bite at the bait here and say that, like Harvard, I know, is a really good med school, shockingly. So if I had to like pick a top med school in the country, I would probably say Harvard based on rankings that I've seen, but who knows? I mean, at the end of the day, I think it really depends on how the education that you are going to get fits with who you are and what you want for your career.
No, I completely agree, and I would echo just about everything you said. The only thing I would add is it's like Harrison said, there is like, you'll see the rankings list come out, like USA Today will put out top 25 med schools in the country.
Yeah.
Yes, everyone on that's going to be a phenomenal med school. But at the end of the day, also, you have to think about what you're looking to do and what you're looking for in medical school, right? So if you don't want to do research, you probably don't want to end up going to one of these schools that's super heavily research focused. If you know for 100% you want to be a clinician, you don't want to do research, probably still going to have to do some. But at the end of the day, every med school is going to have different things that they're better in. And as you go through the interview process, you're going to learn a ton about whatever. If you get multiple interviews, they will spend half of the day, right? Because interviews are like an all-day process for med school. They'll spend like half of the day bragging about all the stuff they do and how they do it better than everyone else. And so you really just got to sit through those and figure out, if I want to practice rural medicine, well, maybe I don't want to go to this prestigious #1 ranked medical school. I want to go to this one that really emphasizes community health and rural medicine. So I don't think there is, like Harrison said, that's probably not the answer you were looking for, but I don't think there is an answer we can give for that.
Yep.
Next question we got is, what MCAT prep do you recommend if under 3 months, and how many practice tests?
Oh boy, how much time do we have left?
Under 3 months.
I'm saying, how much time do we have left here? Because I could talk about this for hours.
Yeah.
Okay, so streamlined answer is the AAMC official prep website is your number one tool to use over the next 3 months. It's not the only tool that I would use, and I would definitely gear your studying so that you use the AAMC website and the prep that they have over the last like month and a half. So I'm saying like the last 4 to 6 weeks probably. I think the AAMC is your best bet, and you should focus, 90% of your energy on that. If you, I don't know like where this person is in their study process. If you are just now starting and you have 3 months to go, I would hammer, like hours and hours every day, the MCAT content. You can do that online. You can look at Khan Academy has a huge database of videos. You can do that with textbooks. Like I know Kaplan has a bunch of textbooks. Blueprint has textbooks. Princeton Review has textbooks. It just hurts to say, you have to read those cover to cover because all the info in there is super, super important. So those are kind of like the main things that I would base your studying around. Is the first half of the next 3 months should be purely based on content I shouldn't say purely, mostly based on content with very, very little actual MCAT question practice. Do a couple of questions, do a practice test at the beginning to see what the test is like, but then the next month and a half, just hammer out that content so that when you get to the test, there should be nothing that's unfamiliar. There should be nothing that you have never seen before. It's not to say you're going to be perfect at it because it's 6 weeks and that's a very minimal amount of time to study for the MCAT before you start actually answering questions. In addition to those things, if you have more time, Med School Coach does have a free MCAT prep app, which is really, really useful. We also have a ton of videos on YouTube where Ken, one of our MCAT experts, walks through a bunch of different topics and he explains them really well. So if you're struggling with any particular topic, those are some great things to look at. I also loved the MCAT podcast, where, if I was driving to work or if I was in the gym or whatever, the host and the co-host essentially read through practice tests, and the co-host was an MCAT expert. So the host would say, oh, I think it's answer choice A. And the co-host would say, well, it's actually not A, and here's the reason why it's not A, and here's why it's not B. Here's why C is correct, and here's why D is incorrect. So it was really helpful for me to hear those thoughts out loud. But again, there's a plethora of resources out there. But if I had to endorse a few, the last couple of minutes of what I was talking about, that's how I would do it.
Yeah, so I actually found myself in an incredibly similar situation as this person did, right? As I talked about earlier, time management was not my friend for the longest time in undergrad. All the way up until my MCAT, I had this great plan set out about how I was going to start studying like a year ahead and do like X hours of my day. Long story short, ended up with like a month and I had done basically nothing. And so, like Harrison was saying, Med School Coach has some phenomenal resources. Awesome. The MCAT Basics podcast absolutely saved me. Because I would listen to Sam. Sam's the host of it, and he goes into just all the knowledge you need to know without diving into like super pedantic stuff that's just kind of like gee whiz knowledge.
Yes.
And I would listen to that driving to work, driving to school, working out. Like I got so much extra studying time in just through the MCAT Basics podcast. And now they even have what's MCAT Go, which is like an even like more like consolidated version of it.
Yep.
And it's got practice questions and stuff. We also have the MCAT Prep app, which is phenomenal. I wish I would have known about it whenever I took mine. I somehow missed it. But like after like going through it the past couple months and like learning about it, it is a phenomenal resource. It's completely free too. Can't recommend that one enough. And then like Harrison said, I used a book set, and as crappy as it is, you got to read those suckers, man. Like cover to cover, like you can't, if you're gonna skip stuff, like there's a couple chapters like here and there maybe that are like 5% yield or whatever, because they tell you how much of each chapter is on there. And I definitely did like fat metabolism was like 1% yield, and I was like next. But obviously the best answer is don't leave yourself a little bit of time. Definitely start studying ahead. because it is one heck of a test.
Yeah. I would also say to guide kind of like what chapters, if you feel really great about some chapters and you don't think you need to read them, most chapters will have practice questions, like study questions at the end. And you can take those, and if you do really well, like you're getting 90% correct, then sure, yeah, you could probably move on. You know that pretty well. But if you think you know it well, and then you go take the questions and you're getting like 50%, you probably got to read the chapter.
Yeah, definitely don't get too prideful where you think you know something and you blow it off. Take the quizzes and make sure you actually know it. Don't just convince yourself you know it, because you can definitely play yourself that way.
Yep.
Next question we have is, there were some clinical experiences that I did, for example, ophthalmic tech, but was not certified. I was supervised though. Is it okay to still discuss this on the application? It's great experience.
Yes, totally. Discuss those on the application as much as you possibly can. Any medical experience, like I shadowed an anesthesiologist when I was in college. I wasn't certified. I didn't do anything except get cleared. Like they did a quick background check on me to make sure I wasn't, trying to get in there to wreak havoc in a hospital. And then I was in there, shadowing surgeries and in an operating room, 10, 12 hours a week while I was home for the summer in college, and it was an awesome experience. You bet your bottom dollar that I was talking about that on my application. I was, saying that those were clinical hours, because those are clinical hours. So any experience that you have in a clinical setting, I think you should talk about it ad nauseum. It's going to seem like at the end of the application process, it's going to seem like, oh, I've talked about this 1,000 times, and you probably will have, but that's good because you have to do it for, every school that you're applying to.
Yeah, no, you definitely hit the nail on the head with that one. Don't shortchange yourself, guys. If you have experience in a clinic, whether it's shadowing or certifications are great. Don't get me wrong. If you have a certification, put it on your app.
Yep.
It's good for them to see. It shows you took some initiative to go beyond just shadowing.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, like Harrison said, everyone that's shadowing, you don't have any certifications to shadow. You're just there experiencing what it's like to interact with patients, what it's like to be in a clinical setting. And that's what they want to see. So 100% add all of that into your application.
Speaking of shadowing, this is something that I did because I was kind of in the middle of COVID when I was in my post-bac, and I was also working as a medical assistant. And so we had the 6 weeks where we weren't working, and it was just kind of a weird time. So I actually, before I even started working for Med School Coach, found their online shadowing database, and they have like 20 plus medical specialties, and they speak with these medical specialists for 40 minutes or so, and the medical specialist talks about the field. And then if it's a surgical specialty, they'll start talking about some surgical cases that they had, and you take a little quiz at the end and you get a certificate that says, I shadowed a dermatologist for an hour. And those types of like virtual shadowing experiences are things that you can then, put on your application. You can say, I have 20 plus more hours than I did before of clinical experience and shadowing. So that's an awesome resource for people that are either really busy or not yet comfortable being in a medical setting.
No, 100%. I think a lot of people kind of like neglect the virtual shadowing opportunities because you're not in clinic or whatever, but the applications don't care, guys. It is clinical experience.
Yep.
And the thing I really like about the one on, I think it's on the Prospective Doctor website, is where you access the one Harrison's talking about.
Yep.
But like he said, it's not just like a Zoom call with a physician and you're shadowing. It's interactive. It's engaging. You're actually learning stuff. There's quizzes. It's so much deeper than just virtual shadowing. And so I actually just put my roommate and my little onto that one because they're doing their applications right now for next year.
That's awesome.
And I was like, it's a phenomenal way to add 20 hours. Like,
so
go
great.
through it, learn some stuff. It's entertaining. It's cool. Like, you get to learn a lot. Love the virtual shadowing. And obviously, like, a lot of us came from like the COVID terms, guys. So like, there's a lot of people who just didn't have access to clinics, especially in like New York and stuff, areas that were super heavy hit. They weren't letting students in to shadow. So take advantage of the virtual ones. Don't let anyone tell you they're not as good as real ones. Obviously, in-clinic experience is great. It's awesome. But if virtual is what you got, take virtual.
Yep.
We got one more question here from Matt that I really like. It says, what are your recommendations on how to best structure and approach a personal statement, and which topics should be avoided?
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's a really good question. So your personal statement, first and foremost, needs to be personal. It needs to be something that you have experienced in your life that you can speak to powerfully. And the caveat to that experience is that it has to be in some way or another, and you can be creative with how you make this connection, but it has to be connected to medical school somehow. So I wrote my personal statement about my dad. My dad, when I was in high school, I was a freshman in high school, spent a month and a half in the ICU. He was on the brink of death on a daily basis. Like I woke up morning after morning not knowing if he was going to be alive. And so I obviously could take that experience and write about that from both a personal standpoint and from a medical standpoint. I also then wove in some of my experience in baseball. Now baseball is a team sport, and medicine is also a team sport. You're working with other doctors, and you're working with PAs and nurses and medical assistants, things like that. So those are a couple of examples of how you can kind of take your life experiences and apply them to a statement that medical schools are going to want to read. But at the end of the day, it has to be personal. It has to be something that you've experienced. Ideally, it would be something powerful, something that kind of touched you and changed your life. And, something you can relate to medical.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Like Harrison said, make it authentic, right? Because I guarantee you, at some point or another, if you get one or more interviews, they're going to ask about it too.
Yep.
So if you just type some BS story that you made up and none of it's true, and they ask about it, you're going to look like a fool in your interview. So definitely don't just try to make up some grand story. It doesn't need to be like a big, like super grandiose story about like how you came up on a car wreck and saved 3 orphans and like all this stuff. Make it about you. Explain why you're interested in medicine. Explain what drives you to want to pursue it even more and stuff like that. The one thing I would definitely avoid mentioning, and it should go without saying in my mind, but I see it quite a bit whenever I'm reading over other people's personal statements, is don't bring money into the equation. Don't talk about how you want to be a doctor because they make bank and your friend's dad's a doctor and he drives a Lambo. Like, as cool as that is, keep that one yourself.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else to add on that one, Harrison? That's all I got for that. You nailed that one as well.
I mean, again, that's a topic I could talk about for hours, but I think we hit the main points on that. Well, one other thing that I think is important to mention on the topic of like, don't bring up stuff. You want to be able to express like where you're coming from and who you are. And a lot of pre-meds that are applying to med school are really impressive people. So toy with how you're expressing the I'm impressive facts, so that they don't come across as conceited and they don't come across thinking like I'm the man, I'm God's gift to earth, or I'm the woman, I'm God's gift to earth. It's got to come across as authentic, like you said, Luke, without being braggadocious. And that is something that I see in a lot of personal statements that I read over, is it like they mean well, but it could come across as braggadocious, and that's something admissions committees don't want to see for sure.
And that's definitely a fine line you're going to have to learn to walk as you go throughout the application process. Because like Harrison said, everyone who's applying to med school for the most part are these amazing human beings.
Yep.
And so you've got to figure out how to tread that line of explaining your accomplishments, explaining what you've done to set yourself apart without being braggadocious, without acting like you're better than everyone else. Because again, in interviews, they're going to ask about a lot of the stuff you put on your applications. So again, you want to figure out a way to talk about it that's get your point across, explains what you did, but without being super braggadocious.
Correct.
Next question we got is how many shadowing hours and how many clinical hours are needed before applying? What jobs are considered clinical? And we already kind of touched on it a little bit, so I'll just let you wrap up the hours portion of that.
Yeah. So how many hours are required? Technically, 0. You don't need clinical hours. You don't need clinical experience. But I think you're doing yourself, number one, a great disservice on your application if you don't have at least some hours of shadowing. Like, you want to actually get into a doctor's office and make sure that you want to do that career. You can't just, apply to med school and say, oh, I want to be a doctor. And they're like, oh, how do you know? And you're like, well, I don't. So number one, you're doing yourself a disservice on the application. Number two, you're doing yourself a personal disservice if you don't go get that experience. So I would highly recommend getting some experience, at least shadowing. But everyone's different in terms of the hours that they have. I had several thousand hours of clinical experience because I worked as a scribe. I worked as a medical assistant. Each of those jobs were a full year. I did, the shadowing in high school and college. And so I had thousands and thousands of hours, but I wasn't super heavy on research in my application. Other people are the exact opposite. They do a lot of research and they're not super heavy on clinical hours. So I think the bottom line is get some clinical experience. If you can get 100 hours, cool. I think that's probably like, if I were personally recommending to someone to go do clinical experience, I would say a minimum of 100 hours. That's just my personal take. But I don't think, I know for a fact that there is no minimum that you have to have clinical hours on your application to apply.
Yeah, no, 100%. I would agree. Getting some is important. Highly, highly, highly recommend getting a good amount. But like you said, there is no minimum. And the thing about like the modern medical school application is schools are shifting to the holistic review so much. So say you are lacking in clinical hours, say, you had COVID or you're immunocompromised, you just physically couldn't get in, there's not enough virtual shadowing out there, whatever the case may be, where you just are lacking clinical hours. Well, where does your application make up for it otherwise, right? Say maybe you're really big into research and you don't have clinical hours because you spent 30 hours a week in your research lab on this cutting edge scientific project. So just if you are lacking in an area, figure out what about you sets you apart in another area, because med schools are really moving into this holistic review. And so just because you're lacking in something doesn't mean you're screwed. If you're down on clinical hours, if you're down on research, just make sure you've got volunteering hours, you've got other stuff that shows you're actually putting in an effort, and you just don't have hours because you just simply didn't want to do it. Next question we've got is, do you think medical schools would accept a student who only took a few of the prereq courses during undergrad?
Yeah, that's what I did. I only took the first 2 years of pre-med classes. So I think I took intro bio, but I did it without lab, which was a dumb choice. So I had to redo that. I took Gen Chem with lab. I took Orgo 1 with lab, and I believe that was it, because I had to take physics and bio at Georgetown. Did a couple other, psych as well, I took at Georgetown. So yes, 100% you can get into a med school without having taken all the prereqs in undergrad, as long as you take them at some point. And while I'm on this thought, I think I should express it, that I actually think med schools now are looking for people who have some really diverse and interesting backgrounds. And I'm assuming that if you are not taking all the pre-med classes in your undergrad, it probably means that you're doing some other stuff that med schools are going to find really attractive and cool. So you should not be looking down on the fact that you've only taken a few pre-med classes in undergrad. If anything, it might actually help your application stand out a little bit and help you be a unique applicant.
Yeah, something I would add is every medical school you're going to apply to, you can go onto their website and look at a list of the minimum prereqs that they require. You've obviously got to hit those. There is some discussion in the med school community right now about removing prereqs. Like, I think there's some schools in the Caribbean who actually did that this year, like altogether. I would still take, your Gen Chem, OChem, Biochem, because if you don't and they don't require it, all you're doing is setting yourself back, because you're going to need it for medical school.
Yep.
You're going to learn it in medical school again.
Yep. And
so go ahead and get a good introduction to it. And then, like Harrison was saying, you don't have to major in biomedical sciences. A girl I took anatomy and physiology lab with was a dance major, and she's a second-year med student right now. So you can go major in some cool stuff as long as you hit the minimum prereqs. So definitely, if you're not interested in like biology, don't go be a biology major and have to take all kinds of like ecology and other various biologies when all you really have to take is the requirements.
Yep.
Next question I really like from Gabrielle says, do you think a student who attended community college for 2 years and then transferred to a four-year, I don't know what that word is, school to finish undergrad will have a tough chance of getting into med school? And if you don't mind, Harrison, I'll answer this because that's what I did.
Yeah, go for it.
So whenever I graduated high school at 17, had no idea what I wanted to do with life. That's how I ended up in the military. But I ended up going to a junior college to kind of like get back into the swing of going to school, right? Because when you take a few years off, it's really hard to come back in and go straight into biology, chemistry, organic, all that stuff.
Brutal.
And so unbeknownst to me, I was like, I'll just take a couple classes at a JUCO and then transfer to Texas A&M. Well, you can't do that if you didn't know, if you're in that situation. Once you take college classes outside of high school, you have to meet transfer requirements. And so I ended up spending like a year and a half at a junior college. And to be perfectly honest with you, I absolutely loved it. I feel like I learned a massive amount at my junior college. And obviously that's where I took my intro courses. So my bio 1 and 2, chem 1 and 2, those type courses I took at a junior college. And personally, I feel like I learned so much more, and it helped me excel and helped me whenever it came back to going to MCAT studying time. I didn't have to review as much because I had such a firm grasp on it, just because the class sizes are smaller. It's a lot more personal relationships with the professors, right? At A&M, my organic chemistry class had like 370 kids in it. My professor had no idea who I was. But at the junior college, we had our professors' phone numbers. We could literally text them for help. Like, it was great. So I don't think it's a hindrance at all. If anything, it was a huge benefit to me, and it's cheap. Junior college tuition was like a sixth of what I pay at university. So do you have anything to add to that one, Harrison?
I just think it again kind of like speaks to the fact that med schools are looking for people that kind of like have done some stuff, you know? I can guarantee you that if I'm interviewing you as someone on an admissions committee, I'm going to follow that story and be interested in that story a lot more than someone who's like, I went to school and did biology and chemistry. Not that that's a bad thing. There are a lot of kids in my class that did that, but I think it makes you an interesting and memorable applicant to have some experiences that are slightly different from other people.
100%. Next question we've got says, what are hobbies for medical school applicants and how important are they? I'm assuming they're meaning like what, I don't really know what they're meaning by this. Actually, I'm just shooting in the dark here, but I'm assuming they're asking like, what hobbies did you have going into medical school, or what would you advise?
Yeah. So I think that what this question's getting at is like the activities that you can write about on your app. I might be wrong about that. So I'll say that like hobbies wise, whatever you find fun, you can, number one, talk about it on your application. You can, number two, talk about it in interviews. So be you, like whatever you find fun, those are good hobbies to have. I played baseball in undergrad, so that was a huge hobby of mine and one that took a lot of time. I was also in an a cappella group in college, so that was a really kind of fun, non-academic, non-athletic thing that I had, and it was just a blast. I really enjoyed it. So truly, just like find things that you think are fun. And I think every single interview that I had, at one point or another, there was a question about the a cappella group, and I was like, oh yeah, it was a lot of fun, and I could talk about it. And, you know, it was great. But then you can also write in your application about activities. So like the more, you know, requirement-esque types of things like volunteer and shadowing and clinical and all that stuff. So you're going to have some room to talk about both the fun hobbies and the, you know, preclinical, pre-med hobbies as well. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Luke.
No, I think you made a great point about in interviews. At least for me, a lot of my interviews were not necessarily medical related questions, more so just getting to know you. So once you get to the interview stage, they've seen all your achievements. They know you're qualified. They're wanting to make sure, you know, you're a personable person, right? This whole holistic review thing, they want you to be a person. Yep. They don't want you to be the perfect applicant on paper, on a screen. And so I got one of my, me and Harrison were just talking about this before we started going live, is one of my biggest hobbies in life is snowboarding. I absolutely love it. Just spent like the last month doing it. And so that there's a spot in the application to put in your hobbies. Obviously I put that in there. It's something I'm very passionate about. And at one of my top med schools, that one of the interviewers asked me about it. And we ended up bonding over this mountain that we both like grew up going to. And so it was like a really cool experience. And so definitely list whatever hobbies you have, list stuff you're passionate about. Again, be genuine. Don't just lie, say you're into snowboarding because some guy on an Instagram live did it and it worked for him, because they're probably going to ask you about it and you're going to look like a fool if you lied on it. So my biggest advice for applications, if you can't tell, is be genuine.
Yep.
Next question we've got is, what was your MCAT score or GPA in undergrad? Harrison, you can share if you want. I don't mind sharing mine.
Yeah, I don't mind sharing mine. So I took the MCAT twice. First time around, it was a 513. It was a good score, and I could have applied with that score and gotten in somewhere, I think. But like walking out of the test, I knew that there was a lot of stuff on there that I had seen before and just didn't study enough. And I was like, I can do better on this. So I took it a second time around and got a 522 my second time. So I had a 522 applying to med school. My undergrad GPA was like in the high 3.6s. And then with my post-bac program, it came up to like a 3.72 or 3.74, so low 3.7s. And that's what I applied with.
Very cool. Yeah. So mine, again, like I was talking about earlier, when it came to MCAT study time, I shortchanged myself incredibly. So I went into it shooting for a 508, 509. That was the score. I was happy with cutting national average. I knew my application was really stout elsewhere. Ended up getting a 514 though, so I was thrilled with it. With my study time, was not going to take it again. 7.5 hours in front of a screen was brutal for me.
Rough.
And then my undergrad GPA was a 4.0, so I also had that. So again, I would have been happy with a 508, 509 as long as I met like the minimum for the schools I wanted into. I also knew I wasn't applying to Harvard, Cornell, Yale. Those research institutions, those prestigious ones, weren't where I thought I would fit in well. So I knew I didn't need a 525 or whatever, because I wasn't shooting for that.
Yep.
So it's kind of up to you on where you want to put your mark. I think anything above 510 is great. Obviously, that goes up every year as applicants get better and better at taking it. So we have a question that says, how much pressure is there during an operation? Harrison, I don't know how much clinical time you've gotten in your first year with your program.
I've seen a couple of operations this year, but someone just said, could you repeat MCAT score? So 522 was mine. And Luke, go ahead.
Mine was a 514.
Hope that helps. So yeah, in terms of operations, I think my shadowing in undergrad was where I saw the most operations. Answering the question of how much pressure is there is tough, because there is a ton of pressure on surgeons to do their job, because it's quite literally life-threatening to like cut somebody open. So there's a lot of pressure. That said, once surgeons get to the point where they're doing surgery, they have performed that act so many times that they're like, the pressure that they feel internally based on what I've seen is pretty low. They're so experienced and they've done so many simulations and they've studied anatomy and they know what the backup to the backup to the backup plan is if something goes wrong, that they really don't feel that much pressure. Even though, you know, as a student watching along and seeing somebody cut open an abdomen, it's like, whoa, like this person could actually die.
Yeah.
And it's funny because surgeons will be like, you know, talking about their weekend and they're listening to music and all the while they're focused, sure. But you can just tell that they've done it so many times and they're so familiar with it that they really don't feel any pressure. And like I said, having backup to the backup to the backup plan and always being prepared for the worst thing to happen, I think they're ready and there if something goes wrong.
Yeah, no, the first time I shadowed an operation, I shadowed an orthopedic surgeon when I was 17. I was in high school, got the opportunity to do it. It was sweet. The thing that stood out to me the most, though, was like I go into the OR, scrubbing with him, going in there, standing all pretty, not touching the blue. And he's just listening to classic rock, just have just total vibe session,
Yep.
just doing his thing. Like, they're not going to send you in there without proper training, right? Like he was saying, the attending surgeons who are in there doing them on their own have spent years and thousands of hours doing this. They know what they're doing. So while there is a lot of pressure, they know what they're doing. They're good. As far as performing them, so as a military medic, we have an absolutely absurd scope of practice. We get to do so much cool stuff. And so we get to throw in like chest tubes and do procedures like that. And again, whenever you're doing it, it's typically a pretty serious situation, right? Because I worked in mostly emergency medicine. And so at that point, you're trained so well that it's kind of second nature, right? You just kind of fall back onto your training.
Yep.
So I remember the first time I put in a chest tube, I was scared like no other, to be honest. And then like patient actually got him in front of me, and it just like, in a way, you kind of just go into a trance and you go into what you're trained to do, right? But no one's ever going to send you into a situation that you're not trained for. They're not going to let you fail if it's going to cause harm to someone else. And so pressure, yes, but you'll be ready for it.
Yep.
Someone said, will this live be saved? Yes, this will be saved. I believe it'll be available on Med School Coach's YouTube. And what else did Selena say? Remember, Harrison?
I don't remember. YouTube, and I think we're maybe saving it like to our drive so we can put sections of it out.
I think you're right.
Platforms as well. So yes, this will be saved and we will distribute it widely.
We got another question about the application. It says, how do you recommend not surpassing the character limit without leaving out important details when explaining activities?
I mean, sometimes you have a lot to say and the character limit, 150 words or whatever it is. I think you have to hit on the most important details, take out the fluff language. And at the end of the day, what you say in the application is a snippet of what you could say about anything. And they could ask you about those things in your interview. So as long as you have the important points, what you did, why it was important to you, why it guided you more toward med school. I think those are the important things to have. But again, it's not easy. Like, you're not just going to write it and, oh, it's going to be good. No, like, you have to go back and edit and re-edit and re-edit and have people read it and have people tear it apart and give it back to you with, red marks all over the page, and then you rewrite it and reread it. So it's a long process, but yeah, you'll get through it.
Yeah. No, I think you covered that one well. Next question we have, it says, how does it look if a person has a high GPA, for example, a 3.7 or 3.8, but has a downward trend overall from freshman to senior year?
What do you think about that, Luke? That's an interesting one.
Yeah, so it's kind of a tricky question, right? Because like we were talking earlier, med schools are moving a lot more to a holistic review. That being said, numbers still matter a lot.
Yeah.
And a lot of schools, and so like for the TMDS, the Texas Med School and Dental School Application System, they run like an absurd number of GPA calculations. Like it's like 50 to 100. And one of the main things they are looking at is trend lines. So obviously having a downward trend going into medical school, it'd be different, if you started with like a 3.0 because freshman year you had a little too much fun, whatever, and then we're trending up. That looks good, sure. But going down, it's kind of tricky, right? Because it depends on what else you have going on. So you'll have plenty of time to explain what's going on in your life. There's lots of space in the application for that. Lots of interviewers will ask about it. So if you have good reason as to why, this GPA started trending down, say one of like your parents or a family member got really sick and you ended up having to be a primary caretaker. It's a very reasonable explanation. Med schools will understand that, right? They know we're all humans. Stuff happens in life. But if it's trending down because you decided to rush a fraternity or sorority your junior year and put school on the back burner to go party, probably not the best look. But again, as we move into this holistic review, there's a lot of areas you can make up for it. So it just kind of depends on why it's trending down, in my opinion. Harrison, any thoughts?
Just briefly, I think you're spot on with that the downward trend, I think ideally is something that you'd want to avoid, but if there's a solid explanation for it, make sure that it is mentioned somewhere in your application, so it's not just downward trend and you're like, yep, downward trend. There should be some sort of reason for it, and you should mention that somewhere in your app. But also at the end of the day, like a lot of people that are applying now, you started school during COVID and maybe classes were mostly online or all online, and then you probably transition back into in person, and being in person and being online are just very different beasts, very different animals. So, if that is a reason for you, be sure to write about it and mention that somewhere in your application, or whatever the reason is, just be sure that it's stated.
100%. Next question is, would you recommend taking a 509 again if an applicant has a high GPA? And so we kind of talked about that earlier. I don't know if you're here for it. When I went in, I would have been happy with a 509. I would have accepted my 509. I knew I had a 4.0 going into it, planned on keeping said 4.0 into the application cycle. So in my opinion, it depends on what schools you're applying to. It's public knowledge, public databases. You can figure out what their average MCAT score is, what their average GPA is, and kind of titrate those to figure out your odds.
Yep. That's spot on.
Cool. Here we go. What do you guys believe is the best way to sell yourself to medical schools? I like that question.
Yeah, I do too. I think we're probably going to say a lot of the same stuff that we've said already. Be yourself. Talk about things in your application and in your interviews that you're passionate about. Be professional in your interviews. I've heard some stories about people that, treated interviews like conversations with friends. And while that can be good to a certain extent, it's still a professional interview and you're still interviewing for a professional position. So definitely go into it with that mindset that, yes, you want to be comfortable and personable and, yourself, but you want to take it seriously and recognize that it's an interview for a professional spot.
Yeah. No, I think you nailed it. Like I've said this whole live, be yourself, be genuine. That's the point of interviews. That's what they're wanting to see in interviews, right? They've seen your stats. They know who you are on paper. They want to see the true you. And obviously it's hard to do that over a 30-minute interview or whatever it is. But everything else Harrison said, I completely agree with. I don't think I really have much else to add. We'll do one more question here and then kind of start wrapping it up, mostly because my phone is about to die. And it's almost 5 Eastern. Nikki says, how do you stay motivated as a non-traditional student who works full-time and taking prereqs?
Oh, that's a good
So I can kind of talk about, like, as an undergrad, how I did it. Again, for me, it's kind of goes back to the whole question of why do you want to be a doctor? For me, it's something I have always wanted to do, like the vast majority of us here. It was my biggest goal. And so that alone for me kind of helped keep the wheels driving forward. I also knew that once I got to a point in my degree, there's no out. And so, like, as bad as that sounds, like, this is what I've always wanted to do. I absolutely love the profession of medicine. Getting to actually practice medicine for a little bit before going to medical school sold me on it even more. And so I knew it was my passion in life. It's what I feel like I was called here to do. And so that alone is what kept me going. Harrison, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think if I were in the shoes of people that are watching this right now, I would want to hear something along the lines of what I'm about to say. And that is that once you are in medical school, as long as you have the passion for it, like you said, Luke, as long as this is what you want to do with your life, it is so, I can't say the word that I want to say, but it is so effing cool to be in medical school and be learning about all the stuff that our human body does on a daily basis without us knowing about it. It just does. And seeing how that operates and seeing how the machinery of the body fits together with the physiology of the body and the chemistry that's going on in any given cell at any one time, and how that all comes together to make an organ system, and the organ system comes together with the rest of the body to make the body work. Like, it is mind-boggling to see all of this in action and to understand how it works and why it works, and then to be able to see someone with symptoms that you've covered in class like 2 days before And you start to think like, I know this, like I know what's going on. And that feeling of knowing what's going on and being able to make a diagnosis, which I just had that feeling for the first time last week, it's unlike anything I've ever experienced before. And it's something that I've dreamt about for like literally years. Like you said, Luke, it's been a dream of mine for so long as well to be a doctor. And that first instance of, I know this and I can diagnose X disease in this person, unlike anything I've ever experienced before. So if nothing else, that feeling of honestly like kind of being in love with this process and what's going on in my life right now, like I'm truly in love with school and with learning. It's like an unbelievable feeling. So let that kind of be your motivation and your guiding light for however long you have left, that I am not at the end of the tunnel. I do not get at the end of the tunnel. However, let me be the light at the end of your tunnel, in that this experience is just second to none.
Yeah, no, 100%. I don't think there's a single person on this live or going into this field or that has anything to do with medical school or trying to get into medical school that thinks this is an easy road, right? If you do, I have really bad news for you. It's going to be rough. It's going to be hard. But at the end of the day, it is so worth it. Whether it's you getting that first acceptance letter or the first patient interaction you have where you feel like you've made a difference in a life, at the end of the day, it is so worth it. Like I wouldn't go back and change anything. I truly feel like this is the road I'm supposed to be going down. Like Harrison said, I'm in love with it. I look forward to every day I get to practice medicine. Every day I get to learn more about medicine, more about the body. It's amazing. I can't put it into words how much I love it. And so hopefully that gives you some motivation to keep going. But it's also completely okay if you get into this and, you know, your sophomore, junior year of undergrad, you realize, hey, maybe I don't really have a passion for science and I don't really care to be involved with the everyday sorrows of patient care and the terrible work hours and all that comes with this career. Like, that's okay. Obviously, for me and Harrison, we both love it. We've dove in head over heels into it. But if you're starting to think maybe it's not you, that doesn't make you a bad person.
Yep.
Not everyone is cut out for a career in medicine. Not everyone wants a career in medicine. So definitely don't force yourself into it. Don't force yourself to like trick yourself into thinking you like it. But yeah, I love it. I wouldn't do anything else. We are at 5:01. Harrison, do you have anything else you'd like to add before we start saying our goodbyes?
I just want to wish good luck to everyone that's here right now. I mean, I know a lot of people are probably in different positions, and some people are applying for med school. Some people are studying for the MCAT. Some people are in undergrad and, you know, studying for an exam next week. I don't know. Just good luck, because this process requires a lot of hard work, like you said, Luke, and honestly, a little bit of luck sometimes, a little bit of luck here and there. And so putting that out into the universe for all of you guys out there.
Yeah, no, thank you all so much for hanging out with us today. I truly enjoyed this. I'm sure Harrison did as well.
It was a blast.
This was great. We're going to look at trying to do these more often. So that being said, follow Med School Coach on Instagram and TikTok. Follow Prospective Doctor on Instagram and TikTok. Follow my page, MCAT Prep App, for more pre-med, undergrad-related content. And let us know what you want us to talk about as we go on and do these in the future. Thank you for those of you that interacted with us today. Very thankful for you guys. This would have been incredibly boring had you not been here and me and Harrison were just talking to each other.
We would have been snowboarding and baseball.
We would have gone way off topic.
Right.
So thank you all for being involved. Can't thank you enough.
Yep, absolutely. We'll see you all next time.